Socioeconomic status, stress, and disease. Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. If you want to see an example of chronic stress, study poverty. Being poor involves lots of physical stressors, manual labor, and a greater risk of work-related accidents. Maybe even 2 or 3 exhausting jobs, complete with chronic sleep deprivation. Maybe walking to work, walking to the laundromat, walking back from the market with a heavy bag of groceries, instead of driving an air-conditioned car. Maybe too little money to afford a new mattress that might help that aching back, or some more hot water in the shower for that arthritic throb. And of course, maybe some hunger thrown in as well. The list goes on and on. Naturally, being poor brings disproportionate amounts of psychological stressors as well. A lack of control, a lack of predictability, numbing work in an assembly line, an occupational career spent taking orders or going from one temporary stint to the next. The first one laid off when economic times are bad, and studies show that the deleterious effects of unemployment on health begin not at the time the person is laid off, but when the mere threat of it first occurs. Wondering if the money will stretch to the end of the month. Wondering if the rickety car will get you to tomorrow's job interview on time. How's this for an implication of lack of control? One study of the working poor showed that they were less likely to comply with their doctor's orders to take antihypertensive diuretics, which are drugs that lower blood pressure by making you urinate, because they weren't allowed to go to the bathroom at work as often as they needed to when taking the drugs. As a next factor, being poor means that you often can't cope with stressors very efficiently. Because you have no resources in reserve, you can never plan for the future and can only respond to the present crisis. And when you do, your solutions in the present come with a whopping great price later on. Metaphorically, or maybe not so metaphorically, you're always paying the rent with money from a loan shark. Everything has to be reactive, in the moment, which increases the odds that you'll be in even worse shape to deal with the next stressor. Growing strong from adversity is mostly a luxury for those who are better off. Along with all of that stress and reduced means of coping, poverty brings with it a marked lack of outlets. Feeling a little stressed with life and considering a relaxing vacation, buying an exercycle, or taking some classical guitar lessons to get a little peace of mind? Probably not. Or how about quitting that stressful job and taking some time off at home to figure out what you're doing with your life? Not when there's an extended family counting on your paycheck and no money in the bank. Feeling like at least jogging regularly to get some exercise and let off some steam. Statistically, a poor person is far more likely to live in a crime-riddled neighborhood, and jogging may wind up being a hair-raising stressor. Finally, along with long hours of work and kids to take care of, comes a serious lack of social support. If everyone you know is working 2 or 3 jobs, you and your loved ones, despite the best of intentions, aren't going to be having much time to sit around being supportive. Thus, poverty generally equals more stressors. And though the studies are mixed as to whether or not the poor have more major catastrophic stressors, they have plenty more chronic daily stressors. All these hardships suggest that low socioeconomic status, or SES, typically measured by a combination of income, occupation, housing conditions, and education, should be associated with chronic activation of the stress response. Only a few studies have looked at this, but they support this view. Only a few studies have looked at this, but one concerns school kids in Montreal, a city with fairly stable communities and low crime, at which in 6- and 8-year-old children, there was already a tendency for lower SES kids to have elevated glucocorticoid levels. By age 10, there was a stepwise gradient, with low SES kids averaging almost double the circulating glucocorticoids as the highest, SES kids. Another example concerns people in Lithuania. In 1978, men in Lithuania, then part of the USSR, had the same mortality rates for coronary heart disease as did men in nearby Sweden. By 1994, following the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Lithuanians had 4 times the Swedish rate. In 1994 Sweden, SES was not related to glucocorticoid levels, whereas in 1994 Lithuania, it was strongly related. Findings like these suggest that being poor is associated with more stress-related diseases. At a first pass, let's just ask whether low SES is associated with more diseases, period. And is it ever? The health risk of poverty turns out to be a huge effect. The biggest risk factor there is in all of behavioral medicine. In other words, if you have a bunch of people of the same gender, age, and ethnicity, and you want to make some predictions as to about who's going to live and how long, the single most useful fact to know is each person's SES, or socioeconomic status. If you want to increase the odds of living a long and healthy life, don't be poor. Poverty is associated with increased risks of cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, ulcers, rheumatoid arthritis, rheumatoid disorders, psychiatric diseases, and a number of types of cancer, just to name a few. It is associated with higher rates of people judging themselves to be of poor health or infant mortality, and of mortality due to all causes. Moreover, lower SES predicts lower birth weight after controlling for body size, and we know that the lifelong effects of low birth weight. In other words, be born poor, but hit the lottery when you're 3 weeks old, spend the rest of your life double dating with Donald Trump, and you're still going to have a statistical increase in some realms of disease risk for the rest of your life. Is the relationship between SES and health just some statistical hiccup in the data? No, it can be a huge effect. In the case of some of those diseases sensitive to SES, if you cling to the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder, it can mean 10 times the prevalence compared with those perched on top. Or, stated another way, this translates into a 5 to 10 year difference in life expectancy in some countries when comparing the poorest and wealthiest, and decades worth of differences when comparing subgroups of the poorest and wealthiest. Findings such as these go back centuries. For example, one study of men in England and Wales demonstrated a steep SES gradient in mortality in every decade of the 20th century. This has had a critical implication that has been pointed out by Robert Evans of the University of British Columbia. The diseases that people were dying of most frequently a century ago are dramatically different from the most common ones now. Different causes of death, but same SES gradient. Same relationship between SES and health, which tells you that the gradient arises less from disease than from social class. Thus, writes Evans, the roots of the SES-health gradient lie beyond the reach of medical therapy. So SES and health are tightly linked. What direction is the causality? Maybe being poor sets you up for poor health. But maybe it's the other way around, where being sickly sets you up for spiraling down into poverty. The latter certainly happens, but most of the relationship is due to the former. This is demonstrated by showing that your SES at one point in life predicts important features of your health later on. For example, poverty early in life has adverse effects on health forever after. Harking back to chapter 6 of this book and the fetal origins of adult disease. One remarkable study involved a group of elderly nuns. They took their vows as young adults and spent the rest of their lives sharing the same diet, same healthcare, same housing, and so on. Despite controlling for all these variables, in old age and their patterns of disease, of dementia, and of longevity were still predicted by the SES status they had when they became nuns, more than half a century before. Thus, SES influences health, and the greater cumulative percentage of your life you've spent poor, the more of an adverse impact on health. Why should SES, or socioeconomic status, influence health? A century ago in the United States, or today in a developing country, the answer would be obvious. It would be about poor people getting more infectious diseases, less food, and having an astronomically higher infant mortality rate. But with our shift toward a modern prevalence of slow degenerative diseases, the answers have shifted as well. Why zebras don't get ulcers, Robert Sapolsky. Thank you for watching.